Greetings, my name is Mike and welcome to the video. Now the official navigation pattern suggested by Android is to have a single activity in your whole app and then multiple fragments from there. Now obviously if you have an existing app it might be quite tricky to go back and migrate to this, but for new apps going forward it'll be a pretty straightforward thing to do. I personally work on a huge app with lots of complex flows and lots of different ways of doing everything, so it's quite nice to see that Android has an official way now of doing navigation and a library to help you out with it. Cool, let's take a look at the app. So far I've implemented a few screens but no navigation yet because that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. So let's just take a look at what the screens look like. The first one is sort of the landing page of the app. It's got two actions that you can do from there. One is view balances for account balances and the other one is to pay someone. My experience is a few years in the banking industry, so that's what I've come up with. When you click on view balances, it'll take you to this screen, which is just some fake data, obviously some card views with accounts and balances and that kind of thing. You can't do anything from that screen onwards. But then if you click on pay someone here, you'll go to a list of all the people you can pay, the beneficiaries or whatever you want to call it. You can click on one of those people and then you'll go to this screen. Sorry, it's a bit slow. You'll go to this screen which allows you to enter more details like your from account number and the amount you want to pay. From here, there's two places you can go. You can either click this disclaimer button and you'll end up on the screen which is just some static text showing you all legal stuff, blah blah blah. Or if you're done with this, there'll be a next button which will allow you to actually do the payment and you'll land up on the screen which is like, cool, your payment succeeded, well done. And it just shows you all the summary information there. And then finally on this screen there'll be a done button which will take you all the way back to the main screen. And as you'll see, the navigation component allows us to implement all of this very nicely and with very little pain. So now that you've seen what the app looks like, the first step is to go and add our dependencies as usual for any new library. So I've got a whole bunch, so I'm just going to copy in here and tell you what's happening. Now don't be alarmed by this. There are, as you'll see, 4 sets of dependencies. You only need to add one of them depending on your project setup. So it depends if you have Android X in your project and if you have Kotlin support in your project. The first set you'll add if you have Android X but no Kotlin. The second one is if you have Android X and Kotlin. The third one is if you have no Android X stuff and no Kotlin support. And the last one is if you have no Android X but you do have Kotlin support. So just take your pick from all of these dependencies based on your project. And there is more information on the documentation site. So in this project I have Android X and Kotlin support, so I'm going to take out the other ones. And that's what we're going to be left with. Even take out the comment, I guess. And then we're going to go ahead and sync. Wait for that, shouldn't take too long. And once that's done, our next step is to create our navigation graph, which is basically a representation of the whole flow in the app. So we can right click on res directory, go to new Android resource file, give it a name like my navigation. The resource type will be navigation. Cool. Press OK and it'll go ahead and create a nice little XML file for us over here in the navigation directory. And as you see, it has an XML version, much like layout files, right? They have an XML version and they have a design layout editor fancy thing. So we switch to the design view down here and we've got nothing so far. Now this is the part where we can add all of our different fragments and screens into the graph. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus over here and we're going to add our main, the landing one first, because that's where everything starts, right? The main fragment is the first thing. And you'll notice that it's automatically added a little home icon here, meaning it's the first thing in the flow. You can change this later on by just clicking a fragment and clicking the home icon here to make a new one, the home destination. From here we can go ahead and add the balances fragment. And then we can now click on the main fragment and drag and drop an arrow to the balances fragment. That represents an action, meaning you can go from the main fragment to the balances fragment. Cool. And remember, the balances fragment didn't have anywhere else it can go. You can just go back to the main fragment. Next, we can add the view people fragment, which is a list of all the people that you can pay. And then again, we can drop an arrow onto there, meaning we can go to that fragment from the main fragment. Okay, from that people fragment, we can add a new one that is pay person fragment. because from there you'll click on someone in the list and you'll go to that fragment. Cool. From here we can add the disclaimer one, because from there we can go to view the disclaimer, or we can add the payment complete fragment. Cool. And then one final action, sorry, I must just resize a bit here. One final action is, remember, our pay complete fragment can go all the way back to the main fragment. So we can go ahead and drag and drop an arrow all the way back to the main fragment. There is this sort of auto layout button over here. If you press it, personally I don't like it too much because it does weird stuff like place the first fragment in the middle of it and it just looks really weird. So I just like to lay it out manually, but that's not really that important. So this now is basically a representation of our whole flow. As you can see, it's quite nice to visualize and see what can go where. But unfortunately, this doesn't really do anything yet. Next up, we need to go to our activity layout, which is our activity main here. And then I need to change this hardcode fragment to use the Android navigation container fragment thing. So I'm going to go ahead and set the Android name property to nav host fragment and get it to autocomplete for us. And then just change the ID to nav host fragment. Cool. This is like a magical fragment which will be used to swap out all of our different fragments inside of that. That's pretty much all that you need to know. From here we need to add some other properties. So I'm going to add the app namespace, and then we have to add the default nav host equals true property, which basically means that this thing will handle all back presses for us. There's more in the documentation if you're interested. And then the nav graph, we point this thing to our @navigation to the file we just created. Cool. And I can remove that comment because it's done. And then that's basically our main activity all set up. So let's just go ahead and close everything. Cool. And from here we can now start implementing the actual navigation. So I'll go to my main fragment, which remember was the thing with the two buttons, view balances. It's this one basically. View balances and pay someone. As you can see here, there's currently no navigation yet, so we're just going to go ahead and implement this. So when they click the view balances button, we can just say find nav controller, navigate, and then we can give it an action here. Now if we switch back to our graph and we go to the text part, we can see all these actions that have been created, which is for each arrow that we dragged and dropped. So you can see the main fragment has two actions to either go to view balances fragment or to the view people fragment, and then it auto generates IDs for us here to represent each unique action. So this ID we're going to use in the fragment when we navigate. So you can say r.id.action to balances. It can just autocomplete for us nicely. So you can see it gets auto-generated with a nice name. Action main fragment to view balances fragment. Pretty straightforward, I think. And then that's literally all you need to do to navigate. So let's go ahead and run this and see how it looks. Alright, here we go. So we have our two buttons as expected. The second one doesn't do anything yet, right? Because the on-click listener does nothing. But when we click on view balances, it takes us to the view balance fragment, which is pretty cool. And if we press back, it automatically navigates back to us, back to the main one. We don't have to handle anything manually, which is pretty awesome. But as you'll see now, it's kind of less than ideal because nothing really is changing up here. There's no back button becoming visible and it's kind of just static. So they do have a way of improving this. So if I can just go to our main activity, which basically is the thing that holds that action bar. In here we can use navigation UI, which is a class that they have, and you can say set up action bar with nav controller, and it basically says please handle all action bar setup for me. And we say this is the activity, and then we find the nav controller, and then in activities we have to give it the ID of the nav host fragment, which is the ID we gave in the main activities layout file. Now let's see what that looks like, shall we? Cool, we go to view balances, and hey look, wait, the title has changed and we have a back button or up button now. Awesome. But now when we click that, nothing happens. But when we click this one, it works. Now there's another little thing we have to do here. In our main activity, we have to override onSupport navigate up. We basically have to capture that back button press event and then delegate it to our navigation controller. So we can pretty much just copy and paste this code, .navigate up, and then we return that thing's value. So we delegate the up button press to the nav controller, and then let's see what it looks like. Alright, starting up the app, view balances. Hey, and it works. It now navigates back for us, which is pretty awesome. But now, what are these weird titles here? View balances fragment. I don't want to tell the user that I'm using fragments and stuff. Now, if we go back to our navigation graph, we can see that if we click on a fragment, we have a label property here, which basically you can use as the title of the screen. It's optional if you want to do that or not, but I think it's a pretty cool feature. So we can change this to something like home. Right, because this is basically our home screen. And the view balances thing, we can just change it to view balances. Simple enough, let's run it and see what happens. Now you can see it's changed to home, and then if I click view balances, it's now view balances. Pretty awesome, I would say. So I'm just gonna go ahead and change it for all the other fragments real quick. Alright, let's go ahead and implement the rest of the navigation here. So I'll just go back to the main and just close everything. So we can basically copy this action here when we click on the pay someone button, but now we don't go to view balances fragment, we go to view people fragment. And let's see what that looks like, shall we? Cool. So if I click pay someone now, we get a list of people, and then we can click back obviously and go back. And then now when we click on someone here, we want to go to the next screen. So I'm going to open up my view people fragment. As you can see, it's just a lot of hard-coded, randomly generated names. And in here we can say find nav controller .navigate r.id.action to the next one was pay person fragment. View people fragment to pay person fragment. Run that. Now we go pay someone and click on someone, and then hey, cool, it navigates to the next one. Oh, by the way, we also should be passing which one we clicked on to the next fragment because you need to know who am I paying, but we'll get to that at a later stage, don't worry yet. I'm just focusing on the navigation from screen to screen now. Cool, so now we can click on someone and we get to the screen. We can then capture some information like account numbers and the amount. Now we need to implement the disclaimer click and the next click. Cool, so I'm going to go to the pay person fragment. Here we'll find some very similar code. Disclaimer button on click, same thing as always. Find nav controller.navigate action. Pay person fragment to view disclaimer fragment. Cool. Copy that. Paste it here. Now pay person fragment to payment complete fragment. Sweet. Let's go and run that. Cool. Pay someone. Select that person. Type in stuff. Disclaimer. We get to a nice static text page, we can go back, then we can click next, and we end up on our payment complete screen. Pretty straightforward and pretty simple to do, I think. Now the final thing we need to do for navigation is this done button click. Remember I said I wanted to go back all the way to the main screen when we click done. So we open the pay complete fragment. In here we can just say, as usual, find nav controller. When the done button is clicked, navigate r.id.action to main. Payment complete fragment to main fragment. Oh, and then there's one more thing I mustn't forget. If we select this action here that takes us all the way back to the main screen, we need to change some behavior here. Since it's not just going to a new main fragment, it must go back to the original one that we created at startup. So we need to have this pop2 behavior. So it basically gets rid of all the in-between fragments and then we end up on the main one. And then inclusive must be yes, because that's how it works. To be honest, I haven't bothered to figure out what that means. Now let's see what it looks like. Pay someone. choose someone, type in some stuff, next, done. Hey, we end up on home. Pretty awesome. If we click back on here, however, we close the app, which is obviously the expected behavior. So that's all for the navigation part. As I mentioned earlier, we do need to actually pass data in between the fragments because we need to know who are we paying when we clicked on them from the list. So what we can do, option 1, is to manually create bundles like normal. You know, when you create a fragment, you can give it arguments that's a bundle. We can still do that. So let's see here. When we click on someone, we get the person back that we clicked on. So then we can say bundle. We can manually create a bundle like this. We can say args.put string person, whatever. And then when we navigate, we can pass in the bundle there as an extra argument. And then on the other fragment, the pay person fragment, we can just load it from the arguments like you normally would, right? Get arguments.getString and carry on. However, since Android likes to make things easy for us, they've added like a plugin that helps us with these arguments. It helps us create them and pass them in a nice type-safe manner. So let's take a look at how that's done. First of all, we can add a plugin dependency to the top level build.gradle. Again, there's two different ones depending on what you're using. So if you're using Android X in your project, add this one, but if you're not, then go ahead and add that one. Since I've got Android X, I'm going to only use that one. And then you need to, in your module level build.gradle, apply a plugin up here. Again, depending on if you're using Kotlin or not, you apply different plugins. This one for Kotlin, this one if you've got no Kotlin. So obviously we've got Kotlin, so we go ahead and apply that plugin and sync. Cool, now that that's done, we can open up our navigation graph again. And in here we can configure what arguments are taken by what fragments. So the first thing that we need to pass here is to the pay person fragment, we need to pass the name of the person that we're paying, that we clicked on from the list. So we can click on the fragment here and we can go arguments over here. We can add a new argument that is the person's name and we can make it a string. Cool, we can add that argument and you can see it shows up here now. And since the plugin we added now generates code, I just need to do a quick build so that the code is generated for us. And then we can open up the view people fragment in the meantime, which is the list of people. And we're just going to remove this code because we don't need to create bundle manually anymore. Cool, so now it auto-generates a directions object for us. So we're currently in the view people fragment, so we can have a view people fragment directions class, and then from here we can say action view people fragment to person fragment, which is the similar to the ID that was generated here. And then this is a method that takes in all of the arguments that we added, and since it was just the person's name, we can pass in the person's name that we get from the adapter on click listener here. Cool, now we have a directions object, and all that we need to do is when we navigate, we pass through that directions object there. No need to pass through the ID anymore because it already knows from the directions object itself where you want to go. So that's all you need to do to actually create the data. And then in the receiving fragment here, we can do something like this. We can get the args. It generates a pay person fragment args class for us. That thing. And then we can use the Kotlin extensions method by nav args to initialize that for us, which is pretty awesome. So now that we have a reference to that object over here, where we need to display the person's name, we can just get our text view. Which one is it now? That one. Text view.text equals to args.person name, which was the thing we added back in the nav graph. Pretty awesome, right? Now you don't need to worry about getting stuff from the bundle and what if it's not in the bundle and what do I do and if it's the wrong type. No more of that. We can just use this type safe object that was generated for us. Let's go ahead and run this and see if stuff displays correctly. Alrighty. Now we can go to pay someone, and then when I click on someone, awesome, their name now shows over here, which it didn't before. So if I select someone else, it obviously just displays whoever's name I selected. Pretty sweet. Now we also need to do the same thing going from this fragment to the next one. we need to pass along the account number and amount that you entered. So we go back to our navigation graph here, and then on the payment complete fragment we need arguments again. We can go and add the person name, because we still need to remember who we're paying so we can show it at the end. And then we can have the account number and amount. And for simplicity, I'm just making everything a string. So these three arguments are taken by the payment complete fragment. Just go ahead and build again so that the code gets generated. In the meantime, open up the pay person fragment. And then over here, when we click next, we now need to construct that pay person fragment directions class. And we need to go to the payment complete fragment. You'll also notice that it generated a one for the disclaimer fragment, which doesn't take any arguments. That's fine. It's just because we have actions going to two different places, so it creates it for all of that. But we don't need to worry about that for now. We're going to go to the payment complete fragment. In here, it takes each of our three arguments. So it takes the person name, which we can just load from our arguments. It takes the account number, which we can load from the account number field. And then it takes the amount. Cool. And then once again we navigate, or just create a variable. And then when we navigate, we only need to pass in those directions. Awesome. And then once again on the payment complete fragment, we can go ahead and load those arguments. Pay complete fragment arguments by navargs. Cool. Finally, over here, we need to populate our text views with the stuff that we passed in. We can have person name complete.text equals args.person name. Sort of copy it for the other stuff. For the account number. And then for the amount. And that's all we need to do. Let's run this and see what happens. Cool, now we should have all of our data correctly persisted through the flow. So let's go ahead and choose someone here, Minnie Wright. Her name is there, that's great. Type in some account number, and then an amount. Disclaimer we can check out, cool, go back, go to the next screen. Cool, payment completed, and we see payment to Minnie Wright, and then the values that we captured before. So I think that is pretty straightforward and pretty fun to actually use compared to using bundles before. And I think that's all I wanted to actually show off in this video. There is some more advanced stuff that I can maybe make another one on, but for the basics, I think this is pretty much all that you need to know. And it already has a huge benefit in helping you to manage your flows. So just remember that the GitHub link for all this code is below, so you can check it out if you want to. And yes, the official documentation, please do check that out, because as I said, stuff can change over time. And again, there's also extra stuff in there that I haven't covered here. So if you are interested in that, like animations and transitioning between different screens, you can find that in the documentation. Although I might actually make another video on that soon. So yeah, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed. Hope you've learned stuff about this navigation component and are as keen to use it as I am. Thanks for watching, and cheers for now.